With Nosferatu still making the rounds, there's really no better way to start this year than talking about one incredibly unique and inventive vampire flick that blends intriguing body horror with the found footage format. Premiering in 2013 on a micro-budget of $318,000, Afflicted is a Canadian-produced Eurotrip vlog-style horror that, from the description alone, boasts a staggering number of elements that make it sound like it's running the risk of being overbloated. However, I'll be damned if it doesn't deliver on its ambition of telling a suitably simplistic story about a man gradually transforming into a vampire, and having us experience firsthand the usual tropes and side effects associated with this long, iconic creature. With a strong hook that's never overindulged in, Afflicted sustains your attention with a stressful and occasionally heartfelt character drama loaded with subtle, realistic body horror, unnerving and unpredictable suspense, and surprisingly decent action sequences that elevate it beyond your typical generic found footage flick. Now, just before we go any further, this video is sponsored by Aura. Have you ever put your trust in a company only for them to one day announce a data breach involving your personal information? Well, I've been there before, and the thought of my personal details being available to anyone doesn't exactly inspire a feeling of safety or security. In fact, just last year, National Public Data revealed 2.9 billion personal records used for background checks were compromised, including addresses, phone numbers, and social security numbers, leading to numerous lawsuits and forcing National Public Data into bankruptcy. If you've not been taking your personal information online seriously, now seems like a pretty good time to start, and Aura is the perfect tool for combating such a costly intrusion. Aura will help remove your personal information from data brokers and people's search sites that sell your information and monitor your online data across billions of data points like public court records and the dark web to alert you of potential identity theft. Should the worst case occur, Aura even provides up to $5 million in identity theft insurance. That's $1 million each for up to 5 people on a single plan. Aura also includes a range of extra features, such as a VPN for secure internet usage, antivirus to combat malware, spyware, and more, password management, and 24/7 US-based support. You get all this in one app at one affordable price, so if you don't want to leave yourself or your family vulnerable to data breaches and brokers, go to aura.com/ryanhollinger to try Aura for 2 weeks for free. That will be enough time for Aura to find out if any of your personal data is exposed. Afflicted begins by introducing us to two best friends, Derek Lee and Cliff Prowse, who also happen to be the film's actual writers and directors, as they venture on a year-long trip to fulfill what's essentially at the top of Derek's bucket list, given the uncertainty and volatility of his neurological condition. Throughout his life, after experiencing increasingly severe headaches, an MRI scan revealed that Derek, the fictional version of his character of course, suffers from cerebral malformation, meaning that complications in the arteries and nerves connecting to his brain leave him extremely vulnerable to hemorrhages and potentially fatal aneurysms. As such, he sees this trip as his one and only opportunity to live his life to the fullest on his own terms, rather than continue to allow his life to be dictated by a disease that's completely outside his control. From that description, you can see where the allegory takes effect when vampirism enters the equation. It gave me slight the taking of Deborah Logan vibes, where the supernatural component is a reflection of a true human tragedy, adding further emotional gravitas to the horror. Cliff goes on to explain that the journey will be documented as a travel vlog series called Ends of the Earth, thus giving us both a tangible justification for the format, and also becoming something that can be recontextualized into documenting Derek's transformation later in the film, when the trip essentially stops. I felt it was a pretty clever choice to go the web series route as opposed to a full-blown documentary, because it allows the story to naturally play out in real time, and the way it initially begins, like every inspirational travel vlog I've ever watched on YouTube, gives it a somewhat novel satirical edge. The presentation and editing style starts out as bubbly, energetic, and overly sentimental, and while I don't want to sound too much like a grumpy cynic at the start of the year, that exaggerative, sappy, corny vibe is so potent, it intentionally hits those emotionally manipulative, albeit very innocuous beats, these types of videos always seem to aim for. In fact, it kinda reminded me of when Casey Neistat popularized the daily vlogs with egregious jump cuts and lo-fi music that then every creator, myself included, decided to copy, because it just has such an accessible, stylish feel to it that just goes for the algorithm-friendly approach. It certainly helps endear us to Derek and Cliff's friendship and presents us with a positive, life-affirming tone underpinned by the reality behind it. Heck, this will sound very backhanded, but there's a relatable obnoxiousness to them that I feel I would also fall into. The point is, it feels sincere. You truly are invited on their journey, rather than dealing with some dead behind the eyes YouTubers with bombastic personas, and that polished, hyperactive editing style only helps accentuate the stark transition into horror. Now, if the idea of a vlog-style film makes you weary, I cannot understate just how tightly paced the entire film is. It doesn't waste your time with arduous travel stuff or vapid character development. It's very efficient with setting up the adventure, and then jumping into the vampire stuff surprisingly quickly and with great effect. During their first week in Barcelona, Derek meets a mysterious woman called Audrey at a bar, and they decide to have a one-night stand after some casual interaction, only for Cliff to later find Derek badly assaulted as though seemingly robbed by Audrey. After some recovery time, they travel to Italy for their next big adventure, but the energy has noticeably dissipated. The editing becomes more muted and Cliff tones down his vlogger persona in response to Derek's sudden aggressive fatigue. Derek ends up bedbound for 2 days before Cliff attempts to revive the vibes out of frustration, but after Derek projectile vomits at dinner, he refuses to go to hospital because it would likely signal the end of the trip due to his condition, which his brother and mother did argue would likely happen. However, his sickness only worsens when a few days later, while touring a vineyard, Derek grows irritable and agitated before eventually fleeing indoors when his skin suddenly and violently burns and blisters in the sun, thus officially confirming we are dealing with a fucking vampire. As I said, the movie briskly moves along. There's no pause for a big exposition dump or heavy-handed thematic connections. It remains solidly grounded with the two men coming to terms with what's happening. The body horror itself is very effectively restrained. If you saw any of the vomiting, blood, burns, or blisters out of context, you'd honestly begin to think they're real. It never pushes to the point of being shocking or disgusting for the sake of it. Not to give too much away just yet, but even when Derek lapses into proper vampire instincts, there's no big bodily transformation that distinctly takes away from the illusion of realism. Although that said, we still have to accept some suspension of disbelief when Derek basically becomes Spider-Man when he discovers his newfound party tricks.
We have to go home, okay? It's the right thing. Jesus Christ.
I actually like how upon discovering Derek's extraordinary strength and speed, Cliff has a brief change in attitude from fearful to excited, because it's such a lad thing for us to go, bro, I'm gonna be vulnerable for a moment and tell you I'm worried about your health and well-being, but oh my god, you're a fucking superhero, let's make that shit go viral. Yet, despite all this, you're still reminded that Derek using his powers wears him down more and more, to the point his eyes even fall out and are replaced by new ones, which calls back to him wearing contacts, so the idea here is that his body is regenerating in much better form than before. It starts to strike an interesting balance where they acknowledge his incredible powers, but his body is still suffering due to the fact he has not eaten since contracting vampirism. After they get into an altercation where Derek injures two men, they learn Derek lusts for blood, but after failing to quench it with cow's blood and a live animal, they realize the blood obviously needs to be human. Now fully aware of his vampirism, Derek attempts to rob a blood bank and hijack an ambulance transporting a severely injured man, yet he once again fails, and later succumbs to seizures and erratic, borderline possessed, dangerous behavior. This scene for me was the film's turning point. It feels straight out of the ending of Wreck, where Derek becomes monstrous and animalistic, making you fear for Cliff's safety after he decides decides to offer Derek some of his blood. After a feral Derek flees the apartment, Cliff tracks him down only to be attacked and killed by Derek, before Derek returns to normal and realizes what he's done, leaving him guilt-ridden and soon shooting himself in the head with a shotgun. It was only then did I realize we are only an hour into this film. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't mean that in a bad way. It just felt like the film was naturally drawing to a conclusion, albeit a fairly unsatisfying one, but nope, there's still another solid 20 minutes of chaos to ensue. In an effort to memorialize Cliff's video project, Derek takes it upon himself to continue the vlogs and document his transformations while tracking down Audrey, assuming she's the one who afflicted him with vampirism. The biggest discovery is that Derek can no longer die. Despite blowing the back of his head off with a shotgun, his body immediately started to regenerate. Now a fugitive on the run from Interpol, the final act effectively becomes an action thriller, with one particularly bloody brilliant sequence being a chase through the blistering sun while evading trigger-happy cops. It's an exciting, albeit incredibly rough watch, as Derek reacts in sheer agony from burns and bullet holes while struggling to wrap his head around the madness that's transpiring. However, the most thematically compelling aspect of it is how it plays on Derek's disease. At the beginning of the film, he's fragile as a result of the neurological condition that can be easily triggered by a simple knock on the head, but even now that he's invincible and the condition no longer being a factor of concern, his new disease still keeps him fragile to a whole host of other challenges. When you think about it, even with his healing abilities, the twisted irony is that Derek is still never able to live a life not dictated by the oppressive conditions of a disease. As I said in the beginning, Derek's entire motive for this trip was to escape this very feeling. He still has to avoid sunlight and feed on human blood to avoid turning feral. Vampirism is firmly established as a horrific and challenging affliction, as opposed to some powerful ability with side effects. If one thing is well and truly clear, it's that vampirism is a disease. It all builds to a crescendo where he confronts one of Audrey's associates, Maurice, whose blood was fed on by Audrey, but he was never afflicted with vampirism, leaving him to perceive himself as unworthy despite not knowing how bad it is. Following a police raid as a result of Maurice's interrogation being live-streamed, Derek is shot dead, only to once again be revived by the disease in feral survival mode where he kills all of them, eventually finding Audrey, who echoes the same dire reality of vampirism. They cannot die, but they also cannot ignore the urge for blood, because as we've seen, should they try to live in ignorance of it, it will simply one day take over and make them a puppet to feed uncontrollably. It's a subversion to those disease virus type films where the villain infects themselves to overcome cancer or some deadly disease or condition despite the adverse effects, where instead there is no cure. They simply have to learn to accept their condition and live with the hand they've been dealt. It's a similar concept to Daybreakers, where the vampires in that film function like everyday rational people, but if they don't keep up their blood intake, they'll transform into a feral vampire state. When Derek ends by questioning why Audrey would curse him, she says it was genuinely an accident. She knew he was dying and his death would have been a mercy, but instead his body fought against death and embraced vampirism. In the end, Derek chooses to isolate himself from everyone and targets only bad people Dexter style like this pedophile as a way to justify his savagery for blood. Meanwhile, during the credits we learn Cliff has also transformed, but not understanding the disease himself, he succumbed to a feral state and no longer able to choose his actions based on any sort of morality. I think it's a fairly mature and grounded ending that lets the mystery linger long after it's over. If you have any overlooked found footage films that you would recommend, please let me know about them in the comments below, and until next time, stay safe, stay away from travel vlogging vampires, and I'll see you all very soon. Bye.